Okay, so when we produce, here's some alcohol, we've got to start with our feedstocks here. So that's what we're going to talk about first. With feedstock, we got two categories that we're going to put them in. It's either already a simple sugar, like beet molasses or sugar cane, or it's a complex carbohydrate, which is pretty much everything else out there. Simple sugars are easy to deal with. Every organism on the planet wants to eat sugar. In our case, we only want the yeast to eat sugar. So, when we have a product that is like the beet molasses, or another example would be candy waste, manufacturers of candy always have broken pieces, stuff that doesn't make it to packaging, all sorts of different things. So this is an easy one to turn into alcohol. What we need to do is cook our batch. So for a simple sugar batch, we've got one tank in here. This one behind you is for liquid or simple sugar feedstocks. When we cook it, we use direct steam injection. That's our boiler right there. So we'll use steam injected into the liquid and allow it to boil to kill off any living organisms that might eat the sugar, since we only want our yeast to do it. Now when we have a different type of feedstock, like a carbohydrate, this is almond hulls. So if you're not familiar, this is what the exterior of the almond looks like after it's sent to market. So you've got hull, shell, and then nut. We only ever see the shell or the nut when we buy them. But these little guys still have 35% sugar in them. And there are tons of these out in the middle of the Central Valley. So this would be an example of a good complex carbohydrate to turn into alcohol. And when we do that, we gotta allow enzymes to do their job. When we eat a carbohydrate, our body has enzymes already. Those enzymes break down that carbohydrate into sugar, and then our cells can convert that into energy.
Fat.
I'm sorry?
It converts it into fat.
Energy. Energy.
It's stored as fat.
Sometimes. So we need to do the same thing. We have a cook tank, another one on the back behind the building here, and the biggest difference between that one and the one inside is the one outside has a very large agitator. Sometimes we're going to be dealing with thick stuff, so it helps to have the agitator. So we broke down the almond hull into smaller particles. This creates more surface area, easier access for the enzymes to do their job of breaking down the carbohydrate. So we can add this with some water to the tank, control the temperature, control the pH, and add the enzymes that will break those carbohydrates into simple sugars. And we do this with pretty much everything else, even the fruit, which you'll notice here we've got a couple of different bottles of alcohol made from fruit, blackberry, strawberry, blueberry, and apple. Fruit has carbohydrates in it. It's not just sugar. So there's even more sugar that we can get at with the enzymes. And since we're making fuel out of this feedstock, we want to be as efficient as possible. We want to get every drop of sugar out of every piece of the feedstock. So things like the fruit would go into there with some enzymes to help break it down further. The only thing that would ever go into the one tank here is if it's already a simple sugar. Nothing else to break it down into.
So step one is to break the complex carbohydrate via the enzyme to a simple sugar. So all of them eventually get to that.
Yep.
And it's the rest of the process.
Correct. So once everything's at simple sugar, we boil it to kill off any other living organisms, including the enzymes. And then we can cool it down and put it into one of our fermenters here. Now the yeast that we use for fuel alcohol has a high tolerance for alcohol. It's around 20%. Most yeasts don't have that type of tolerance. They're a little bit lower because they're most of the time being made into either beer or wine or even some of the distilled beverages, which are still grain. Those yeasts don't tolerate 20% environments. So this allows us to be pretty efficient in our tanks. We can make a batch upwards of 15 to 18%. I'm going to shut this door here. Now we want to do that because if the environment gets past 20% and there's still sugar in there, the yeast will die. Just like we would if we consume too much alcohol. Same thing happens in the tank. If that tank gets past 20% alcohol, the yeast could die and any leftover sugar would be wasted. So we want to keep it between 15 and 18%. Once the batch is in there, we add the yeast. Now the yeast will consume the sugar and they will convert the sugar into equal parts by weight, alcohol and carbon dioxide. So what I mean by weight, 1 pound of alcohol is going to also be 1 pound of carbon dioxide. So that's a lot of carbon dioxide that we can make, but this is extremely clean carbon dioxide. It's not created like most of the bulk carbon dioxide, which is from fracking or the oil industry. This is made by natural living organisms. So it'd be like if we just sat there and exhaled in a tube and collected it all. It's pretty clean CO2. But we collect it all here. So you'll notice there's some plumbing across the top of the fermenters. So that way, as the CO2 escapes, we can capture it. And from here, it goes into a holding tank, and then that tank gets compressed to a storage tank. So we can store compressed CO2, and here on the farm, we just deliver it into the greenhouse for the plants, which I believe they demoed down in 7. Yes? Good. The yeast will take about 3 days to ferment one of these batches in these tanks here. If you were making a beverage, that could take anywhere from a week to a month to ferment. Because you want it's a totally different kind of control you're doing there. You want to make a good flavored item. Here we're only about efficiency because we're making fuel. So 3 days to get the batch done, which is pretty nice. This means we can move pretty quickly. Once the yeast have finished their job, now all we need left to do is separate the alcohol from whatever else is in there, which is mostly water. And that's where distillation comes into play. So distillation is the process of using heat energy to separate two liquids of different boiling points. In our case, water is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Alcohol is 172 degrees Fahrenheit. So we got about 40 degrees of gap, which makes it very easy then to separate. So we hook up our tank. Our system here can run continuously. So as long as we're going to use the word beer, in the tanks, the distillation system can just keep on running. So the first thing we do is we deliver the beer to our first column here. This one is called the stripper. The beer is injected at the top and steam is injected at the bottom. What we need to do now is turn our liquid into vapor, because that's the only way to separate the two. We want them to both be in a vapor form. So as the beer comes in, it gets heated up to the boiling point. And this column on its own will produce 100 proof alcohol. 100 proof alcohol is 50% alcohol and 50% water. Everything else, all the extra water, all the dead yeast, all the nutrients, vitamins, minerals that were in the batch will get to the bottom of this, all the solids as well. And from there we can send it to a holding tank, which I believe then we showed you from there, it goes to the methane digester. And we can create our own methane. Use that methane, bring it right back up, run the boiler or run any other equipment that could run on natural gas, which is quite a bit at the plant. The 100 proof vapor then will travel to the next column. Now the next column here is pretty similar distillation column to what I have over here. This is a small lab setup, but this is a batch still, but it shows you what's going on inside the big column there. The liquid is boiling at the bottom. As it boils, it turns into vapor. The vapor begins to travel up this column, but the column is full of packing material. The packing material is actually pretty benign. It can be made of anything as long as it can handle the temperature. In this case, this is little glass tubes, but all that they do is create surface area. So as the vapor travels up, it touches the surface and turns back into liquid. And this happens over and over again as it travels up the column. And we control the temperature at the top. So down at the bottom it's 212 degrees, but near the top it's around 170 degrees. So that way when the vapor gets to this point, the only vapor that can come past is alcohol. Because at 170 degrees we should have liquid water. The liquid water would fall back down. The alcohol vapor would continue to rise up into the condensing unit. This is just a tube inside of with water. that helps cool the alcohol vapor, turns it back into a liquid, and then it drips and we're able to collect it. Same thing is going on inside the big column. Now our system here, we run it to produce 170 proof alcohol. That's going to leave us with 15% water. The reason for it is, when you use distillation to separate alcohol and water, the best you can achieve is 192 proof with just heat. But to get from 170 to 192, it uses 10/11ths of the total energy of the system. So we knock that out because, well, that's a lot of energy, 10/11ths worth. We go to 170, and the way we're able to do that is the last two columns here. The 170 proof vapor will travel inside to this column. These columns are called absorbers. They only have an affinity for water. The material inside only likes water, so the water vapor travels in, it sticks, and only the alcohol vapor can escape. And from there we can collect it and it'll be 200 proof alcohol. These are also regenerative, so once a column has filled with water, we only have to drive it off using hot air. Just past the boiling point of water, that'll drive the water off, and that can be collected. It's clean water, it's been distilled, we bring it back into the plant for the next batch, or use it for irrigation. So that way nothing gets wasted. Any questions about distilling? No? All right, let me show you a few other things than the way we had over here. So alcohol has been around forever, right? Pretty much. First person that figured it out. But we have some fun things that we like to show that how old of an industry it was. This runs on alcohol. This was made in 1912. Yes, it is an iron. You filled the little chamber with alcohol. You lit it, had a little flame in here, and you'd iron your clothes. 1912 didn't really have electricity, right? So, had to figure out a way to make nice pressed clothes. This was a pretty easy at home. So this was manufactured by Coleman. Pretty nice little toy. So one of the other items here, this stove. This is actually pretty used a lot in the marine industry here, but this is part of another project that we've been working on as an advantage for a lot of countries that still have people burning wood, dung, or coal to cook their meals, which happens, statistic-wise, what was the number again? 4 million deaths a year just from cooking.
We met these
because of the fumes they're breathing. So the advantage of these, pretty easy. These cartridges actually fit into the bottom part of the stove here, and these cartridges could be filled at the alcohol plant and then delivered to the home. Just like the milkman used to deliver milk and pick up the empty bottles, bring you the full ones. This works very similar, so you can see this is some nice pure alcohol. I spilled a little on the side, unfortunately. But it doesn't come back out. So these can be sealed, delivered, and then one cartridge could cook 3 meals. Pretty easily. That would save probably close to 4 million lives if we could get everybody to convert to it. But this could be part of the program with the alcohol plant in that community. They could be supplying the alcohol to these families. We could supply the stoves as well at a very low cost, because obviously something like that might not be in their budget. But then these could be distributed by whatever current delivery system they have for other things, and to generate clean cooking. Exactly. And they could be refilled at the plant in areas where alcohol is frowned upon. There's no way to get the alcohol out of here. The only thing you can do is burn it in the stove. So now we'll do a little demo here on why burning alcohol over gas is beneficial. So what I've done is put a little bit of gasoline, just regular unleaded gasoline, and some of our 200 proof alcohol here. So we will light the alcohol, and you're going to see there's a very light colored flame, not much going on, mostly blue. And then we'll light the gasoline. So immediately you'll see the gasoline is an orange flame and a lot of smoke coming off of it. Those two things tell us that there's a whole bunch in there that's not burning. a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't burn. So that's waste. That's harmful to us. It's harmful to the engine that it's in. This is why you'll see now the glass containers start to get a lot of black on it. Same thing's happening in your engine. The alcohol one stays clean because it burns completely. It is using all of its energy and converting it into heat.